Cool. Is that up? You guys can see it?
Looking good, looking good.
Awesome. Thanks, Eddie. Well, it's really awesome to be here today, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about something that I feel like is really relevant right now for all of us who are human. I think that anyone who's paying attention to anything feels kind of the unique weight and darkness of the times that we're living in right now. We've got COVID still going on. We're recovering from this economic crash. There's the climate. There's the backlash against the Black liberation movement and against transgender people, particularly trans kids right now, against immigrants. I mean, I don't have to tell you, right? But just to set the scene, people are really struggling right now. Nearly 1 in 4 households have experienced food insecurity over the past year. And that number has doubled from what it was before COVID, which was also still pretty remarkably high. And of course, the impacts of COVID itself are just staggering. While things are starting to get better, more than 1 million people in the US were hospitalized at some point due to COVID, and those folks are going to have, many of them, really lasting health impacts. And as of this past Thursday, more than 600,000 people have died. And then the biggie, the issue that sort of dwarfs them all, is climate change, which will result in millions of climate refugees in the coming years as many of our cities become unlivable due to heat, fire, storms, flooding. This is a truly existential threat that really could ultimately just destroy us. And then, in addition to all of these massive public and political tragedies, we still have to deal with the day-to-day tragedies of just being human, like illness. This is my little sister, Alethea. She is one of the kindest, gentlest, most creative person I've ever known. And now at the age of 38, she just entered hospice for terminal brain cancer. And this is my passionate and spunky daughter, Lois, who for the past 5 years has been learning to live with major depression. And this is my friend, my mentor and colleague, Michael Weiser, who has been a fearless advocate and ally for anyone experiencing marginalization throughout his career. And he died very suddenly last year. The grief of losing him just continues to be brutal. It just sucks. This all just sucks, right? It hurts. But one of the great things about humanism is that we don't have to pretend that it doesn't. We don't have to try and realign our feelings of grief and despair with some kind of cosmic purpose. We're not looking to a divine plan that promises good things for us, but keeps failing to deliver. We can take life as it really is. I will never forget, many years ago, I was hosting a conversation about death with a humanist community at my home in Arizona. And a lot of the talk centered around trying to find meaning and beauty in death, you know, this cycle of life and giving our bodies back to the earth, the joy and urgency of life in the face of the reality that we all must die. And there was a young teenager with us who had just lost her 20-something-year-old uncle to cancer. And she suddenly burst out, "Why can't we just say that death fucking sucks? It doesn't mean anything. It just sucks." And you know what? We can say that. And saying it means that we can get straight to the process of grieving rather than trying to make sense of it or pretending to be happy that the people we lost are with God now. But then what? How do we endure and flourish when we know the truth is that sometimes the humanist experience is just awful? I believe that humanism has extraordinary relevance in times of both personal and political darkness. The practice of humanism and its moral tools can be powerful in working against darkness. So usually when I present on humanism, I end up giving kind of like dry academic talks. I don't tell enough stories, I don't have any jokes, and I get overexcited about stuff like modifying utilitarian ethics with feminist care theory. But these tough times that we're in, they're personal for all of us. We're all struggling through the reality we're in, many of us in a deeply personal way. So I think that it makes sense for me to tell you a little bit about my personal journey to humanism and how I've come to see the practice of humanism as a source of strength. Okay, so a Methodist minister, an evangelical Christian, and a Hasidic Jew walked into a bar. Actually, this did not happen. They were not really bar people. They are my parents. That's my dad, my mom, and my Papa Shimon. And how this became my family is kind of its own story, but suffice to say, I grew up with parents who were pretty religious. Their religion, though, was very humanistic. It was compassionate. It valued questions. It encouraged lifelong learning. It didn't rely on divine intervention, although all of them did believe in that. But they didn't teach us to wait for miracles. They taught us to work for them. My parents were involved in racial justice work, in disability activism, and they engaged in radical hospitality for anyone who needed a meal or a place to stay. All of the religions they practiced were centered around human responsibility and on building intentional communities of support and care. These values made me a humanist, although I did not know that word for a very long time. Probably the greatest gift of my life was being part of a family where my mother insisted everyone belonged. Anyone who needed to eat or needed a place to stay or a hug was always welcome in our home. The power and possibility of being able to build community wherever I go has made me feel incredibly at home in the human family. This is humanism. But my childhood was not all good things. Because of mental illness and violence in my house, as a teenager, at a certain point, living at home was no longer an option. And so when I was 16, I ended up not living anywhere. I didn't realize that this was called homelessness until much later, because I thought homelessness meant sleeping under bridges or on park benches, and I never slept outside. But I stayed with a series of friends and coworkers from my work-study job at McDonald's, family members, friends of family members, boyfriends. I didn't always know where I would be sleeping from one night to the next. I felt like I was constantly begging and that my safety depended on whether I was lucky enough to find a good person to let me stay with them. And I both saw and experienced some truly terrible things during that time. But on the whole, I was extraordinarily lucky, because here is what happened next. My junior year, right before I dropped out of high school, I got a grant to go on a school trip to Washington, D.C. And my mind was totally blown while I was there. As someone who had been feeling really helpless and voiceless, I felt like this was where people get heard. This is how you make change to get people's needs met. And I knew that I wanted to find a way into this world. So a couple of months later, mostly on a whim, I marched into my local congressman's office. I had a shaved head and combat boots and a Rage Against the Machine t-shirt. It was Congressman Bruce Bento from St. Paul, Minnesota. That's him in the corner there. So I marched in there and I asked if there was an internship or something that I could do. And despite the fact that I was a homeless teenage high school dropout, the staff took the time to connect me with the campaign office, where the campaign manager was happy to put me to work. That campaign staff loved me in an inexplicable way. They essentially wrapped themselves around me in a bubble of protection and care. They made absolutely certain that my life was going to turn out okay. When she learned about my situation, the campaign manager, Jane, started giving me a daily stipend for food and bus transportation. The field manager, Eric, let me sleep on his couch, and eventually I was able to rent a room in his house, which was a huge deal for me because I was too young to sign a lease. But most importantly, they treated me, a kid who felt thrown away. They treated me like someone who was smart and valuable and who they believed would do big things with her life. So when that campaign was over, I had a home, I had a resume with references that included a US congressman, and I had a whole community who made up a safety net for me for decades after. When I look at the story of my life and how my outcome has been so very different from so many people who face similar challenges, this fact stands out the most. There were many people who chose to take responsibility for me without reservation. They each participated in acts of compassion and care that were not required of them, but that they were inspired by their own consciences to do. And in doing this, they became powerful. They created a world of possibility for me. They gave me a life, and therefore they gave my kids a life. They gave possibility to everyone that I've ever helped or provided aid to. They've enabled every donation I've made to a charitable cause. All of this came from a few good people making the powerful and empowering decision to take human responsibility. And years later, when I read Greg Epstein's book, Good Without God, and saw the word humanism, I knew that this power had a name. Now, there are many different definitions of humanism, and because humanists aren't dogmatic, how we define our life stance is in a constant state of evolution. We can update our definitions and understanding of who we are as we learn more about the world and about ourselves. But this one is my favorite definition right now. It's kind of a combination of a few that I've come across. Humanism means accepting that positive change requires human intervention. It means taking responsibility for improving the world for all life using the tools of reason, compassion, experience, and hope. For me, humanism is defined by the action of taking responsibility for life. It's not just something you think or believe, but it is what you do and how you engage with the world. It is how you actively cultivate caring relationships and erase arbitrary divisions between one another in the human family. And there is incredible power in this action. Look, we live in a cold, dead, value-neutral universe. If there is going to be any love in this void, if there's going to be care, compassion, joy, it is because sentient beings create it. We are the source of all hope, all kindness. We are the light in the darkness. Creating that light isn't magic. It is work. And these are the tools humanists use to guide and inform that work. And I want to talk today especially about hope. One way to understand hope is as the belief in the plausibility of the possible rather than the inevitability of the probable. That's a quote from Marshall Gans, but I got it by way of James Croft, who is a fantastic speaker on humanism if you ever have a chance to listen to any of his talks. I'll say it again. Hope is the belief in the plausibility of the possible rather than the inevitability of the probable. And what this means is that what is most likely to happen doesn't have to happen, that there is the possibility, if we work really hard together, we can achieve the improbable. And cultivating this frame of hopefulness is a wonderful, inspiring feeling. But it actually isn't just a feeling. Hope is a complex motivational system that allows us to make meaning out of our experiences, to learn, and to successfully find opportunities to accomplish our goals. By viewing the world optimistically, we stimulate the reward center in our brain and activate a physiological neurochemical process that actually makes us more effective at capitalizing on opportunities because we're more likely to look for and find those opportunities. And hope, this very special, pleasurable, useful tool, can be very difficult to maintain. There is awfulness around us. And to make the world better, we have to look at that awfulness and see where the harms lie. This can be overwhelming. That is why cultivating community is an essential humanist practice for anyone who wants to be an agent of good in a dark world. The thing is, when we leave these safe spaces and go out into the world and fight for equality and ecological justice, basic human rights and dignity, it's gonna hurt. And family in taking the great risk of loving and being loved in a mortal world, we will get hurt. This world will punch us down sometimes. We will have to watch people we care about get punched down. And so we need to have communities to come home to and by which to be nourished. So participating in communities like Oasis is really critical to humanist practice. We can celebrate together and grieve together and support one another and work together to heal ourselves and our world. There's one other organization I want to mention briefly if you're looking for resources for practicing humanism. It's an organization that I truly view as the center of compassion for the humanist movement. It's Foundation Beyond Belief. FBB was founded about 10 years ago to help inspire and focus charity and service within humanist communities. And it's shifted over the years towards increasing humanist impact, particularly on food insecurity, and to really focus on ensuring that everyone has access to the basic things we need to live well. We've been able to give more than $3 million to charities that share our humanist values, both in the US and internationally. And I think that one of the most powerful things that FBB is doing right now is providing grants to local communities, actually like this one, to support local service work. A great example of how this local focus has an impact, both in terms of making change in the world, but also for experiencing change in our own hearts and minds, was this horrific winter storm in Texas this year. During the storm, Foundation Beyond Belief had volunteer teams in the affected areas, actually including Houston Oasis was one of those teams that had members struggling with lost power, burst pipes, no access to grocery stores, so limited food and water supplies. But despite facing immense difficulties personally, those teams prioritized the needs of people without homes in their communities. They had been addressing homelessness as volunteers for years, and the relationships that they developed engaging in the world inspired them to care deeply about the effects of the storm on people without shelter. These teams put unhoused folks in hotel rooms, bought sleeping bags and warm clothing, replaced all kinds of different essential items that folks had to abandon when they sought shelter. They literally did life-saving work. And throughout the year, FBB teams, including several in Central Florida, are fighting food insecurity by providing thousands of meals to hungry people every month. If you have any interest in learning more about service with FBB, you can just text the letters FBB to 22828 to sign up for the email list. And hopefully North Orlando Oasis will be joining that volunteer network soon as well, so you'll be able to connect through us. But there are also a million other ways for you to practice humanism. The important thing about it, the way that it helps us confront darkness, is through the active practice of it. It is a practice that we apply in our everyday lives, like math or the scientific method. It's something that we bring into the world with us as we engage with it. The power of humanism is in this action, this creative work that builds our lives around us with our own efforts, that weaves from nothing our sense of purpose and realizes goodness in an uncaring universe, that participates with others and pursues, rather than prays for, a more humanist world. And with that, I am happy to take questions.
Oh, I know I'm speaking for everybody when I say that was absolutely awesome. Got some comments. We see here it says, Roger says, thanks for sharing your journey. Someone from the crew says, amazing. I love that. Ruth says, I love that we evolve as we gain understanding. Thank you so much for sharing. Got a question here. Seráh, how have you been able to discuss grief with religious family and friends? For instance, how do you respond when they say something like, it's God's plan, or what we need is prayer, and the like?
Eddie, can you ask me that one more time? It was rejoining me as a non-host and I missed the question.
That's from Ruth. Yeah, sorry, I'm back on. Let me pull up the chat real quick. My taco head is next to me here. Okay. Taco Tuesday. Says, how have you been able to grieve with family and friends? For instance, how do you respond when they say something like, it's God's plan, or what we need is prayer?
So one of the things that's interesting about death and dying is that I think that religious people and non-religious people all really do have the same concerns about it, and that some of these things that that you're saying, it's God's plan or whatever, it's almost just an automatic response that people say to try and make themselves feel better, but it's not really, it doesn't actually help assuage their real concerns. And I did hospice volunteer work for many years, and what I found was that people who are facing death are worried about the dying process. Is it going to hurt? Is it going to be scary? They're worried about, are their friends and family going to be okay when they're gone? And they're worried about their legacy. And I think that people who are religious and non-religious all share those concerns, and those are things that we can address with just facts about the world. We can tell you what's going to happen to your body as you're going through the dying process, so that you're informed and you don't have to be as scared. We can help make sure that people's kids and family members are going to be okay. We can talk about what we've done with our lives to leave legacy. And so personally, I just sort of ignore the little comments about God's plan, or and I, when people want to pray for me, I think that's fine. It's nice to know that people are thinking about my family, and then skip over addressing those conversations and getting into the real stuff that people are actually worried about when they're facing death.
Let's get my video back up here. think we have to allow my video. No, I hear you on that, and you know, it's funny because people ask me what I think is going to happen after I die. I'm like, I don't even know what's going to happen a minute from now. Like,
Exactly.
I just don't. I literally have no idea what's going to happen a minute from now. I mean, I could go top of the hill just like that. So I think your approach and what you're saying is amazing. We want to thank you for your time. I don't know if there's any other questions that we had. Let me just double check the chat real quick. Yeah, no, I think that was a great talk, and we really appreciate your time in doing that, Seráh.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Wait, we have
Yes.
one more question that just came in, so I don't have a chance to type it, so I'll just read it from Facebook.
Okay.
Julio asks, while you were living in homelessness, how did you overcome addiction or the negative influence of addiction?
Well, I didn't personally experience addiction during my homeless journey, but I do know that that is a reality for a lot of folks. And it's a unique challenge in the humanist community because so many of the ways that addiction is addressed in the United States is to treat it as a spiritual problem. And so people are sent to you know, AA and 12-step programs that have this element of spirituality. So it's in recent years, it's been really great. There are a number of now secular science-based support groups that don't use 12-step methods, but use cognitive behavioral psychology and other methods like that. And so that's what I would recommend for folks who struggle with addiction as humanists.
All right. Well, and would love to have you come back and talk some more about this. You know, community can make such a difference in our lives in a lot of different ways that we take for granted, you know, when we have it around us. So, very timely discussion.